People tall and smooth, a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose lands the rivers wash away. Hello, everybody. This is Gilgamesh. And today we are going to be talking about Isaiah 18. This is part of an ongoing series on the book of Isaiah. And this is a special one because we get to talk about one of my favorite areas, and that is the area of Cush, also sometimes translated as Ethiopia and sometimes known in more modern contexts as Nubia. I've actually been to modern area where this is referencing and have met many people that are direct descendants of the people we're about to talk to today. They're fascinating people with a rich and diverse history. But I want to talk a little bit about what they were in ancient times and what we know of their civilization. So what was Cush? Cush is, like I said, generally translated as Ethiopia in some of the Bible translations, but the Hebrew word is Cush. And modern Ethiopia is not in the same place as the nation of Cush was. So there's lots of confusion around that name. They were a political empire that lived along the Nile River further south than the Egyptians. Egypt was often divided into Upper and Lower Egypt. And for Westerners, this is sometimes a little confusing to us because we would think of Upper Egypt as being in the north, but actually Lower Egypt is in the north because the Nile runs from south to north. When we talk about Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, we're talking about downstream and upstream. And so upstream Egypt is to the south, and Lower Egypt, downstream Egypt, is to the north, where the Nile River then fans out into a delta and has a much larger area of agricultural land. Whereas along Upper Egypt, there's only this thin, small area right along the river that can actually be cultivated for agriculture. But if you go even further up the Nile River, you wind up in the land of Cush, beyond where the Egyptians were. And Herodotus, about 450 BCE, was one of the earliest geographers. He was the first one to explain where this was at. This map that I'm showing you here is a modern creation, but it is based on his descriptions. As you can see, it was a vague understanding of the world, and this is several centuries after the time of Isaiah. At the time of Isaiah, the world was not this well understood. So this was a mysterious place and was often thought of as the furthest place anyone could imagine would be this land of Cush. And it wasn't clear at all where the Nile went. No one had explored the lower parts of Libya, which is what Africa was called back then. Ethiopia was a Greek term that meant burnt face, and it was used for any dark-skinned civilization that was at the very southern end of the known world. Not that they knew a lot of them. This is what the Cush people were, is they were people with black skin. We would not know where the Nile actually came from until much later in our history. It was actually 1858 that we were able to trace the Nile back to its source. In modern times, this area of Cush, or Nubia, has been flooded, along with countless archaeological treasures that are now completely underwater under Lake Nasser, with the building of the Aswan Dam by the Egyptians, which ended thousands of years of the Nile actually flooding every year. Modern situation, the Nubians have lost a great deal of their homeland to being flooded by this reservoir and have been displaced. But for thousands of years, they were the southern neighbors of the Egyptians and heavily influenced their culture. In the section of the Bible known as the Table of Nations, it's explained how all the known nations of that time were related. Now, this section shouldn't be taken terribly literally because that's not how civilization works. Instead, it's intended to illustrate the relationships between all peoples and the common family of man. Ham, who was the son of Noah, has four sons. One of them is Cush. Another one of them is Mitzrayim, which is the Hebrew name for Egypt. Another one of them is Put, which is uncertain what that is, but it's probably a northern African group. And the other one would be Canaan, which were the indigenous people of the Promised Land and are actually closely related to the Hebrews, maybe even the same people. And so the idea here is that they were all part of this big family. They could trace back to Noah through Ham. these African peoples are often referred to as Hamitic people because of that tradition. In the Christian New Testament, there is this very interesting scene that happens where Philip gets an impression. This is in Acts chapter 8, verses 26 through 31. Philip gets this impression that he should go down south out of Jerusalem towards Gaza. And he's there in the desert, and he runs into a man who is an Ethiopian. This is an Ethiopian eunuch, and he has great authority. Eunuchs often did, and eunuchs often were placed with the women because, well, it was safe. The eunuch here has great authority, and he's under Candace, who is queen of the Ethiopians, and he's a man of some authority there, and she was coming to Jerusalem to worship. Well, in that little bit, there's all sorts of interesting things here. We have people that are from Cush in the Second Temple period that are coming to Jerusalem to worship, presumably at the temple. How did this happen? Where did that religious connection come from? And then as he meets this Ethiopian man, he is reading Isaiah. And so more interesting questions arise from this. Apparently, he had either Isaiah in a translation he could understand, or he could read Hebrew, one of the two. And Philip talks to him about it and says, what do you think of what you're reading? Do you understand it? And the Ethiopian responds back, of course not. It's Isaiah. And so we have this idea here that the people of Cush had a connection to the Jewish people, had a connection to the God of Israel, went to Jerusalem to worship, and had connections with the Old Testament prophets. This is not the only connection we have to Cush. We also have interesting things like the prophet Zephaniah. He is referred to as the son of Cushi, which is how you would say Cushite. He's the son of a person of Cush, is what it sounds like it is saying. And this seems to strongly imply that he was at least partially ethnically Cush or Nubian. He also prophesied about Cush, as does Isaiah. And so they play a pretty significant role here. In the book of Numbers, chapter 12, we have this interesting confrontation where Miriam and Aaron speak against Moses because he has taken a Cush woman and has married her. We're not clear what this is talking about. It's possible this could be referring to his wife Zipporah, who is mentioned elsewhere as being a Midianite, or this could be a completely different wife, as limiting to one wife would just be uncivilized. We're not really sure what's happening here, but apparently Moses married a Cushite woman, and we really don't know any details about that. Although Cecil B. DeMille did, of course, speculated on a bit. Elsewhere in Jeremiah, we get this interesting statement in Jeremiah chapter 13, verse 23, where he asks the question, can a Cushite change his skin or a leopard his spots? This is, again, a reference to their black skin. And as an immutable property that cannot be changed, just like a leopard cannot change the color of his coat. Note that this is not a negative thing. From everything we could see, these were a highly valued people, and there was not the concepts of race or any type of lower status due to the color of their skin. It just simply was noted that they were, in fact, black. There is actually, in Jeremiah's life, a Cushite who's named Ebed-Melech, and this name means servant of the king. And he's actually going to save Jeremiah's life, and he's going to receive a special message of salvation through him. And you can see that in Jeremiah chapters 38 and 39. Jeremiah had very positive interactions with Cushites. Now, Isaiah's time, where we're talking about Cush. What was going on with Cush? Well, it's actually a fascinating time and probably one of the most interesting times in the entire Cushite civilization. From around 744 BCE to 656 BCE, almost an entire century, beginning about 5 years before Isaiah's first vision that he has back in Isaiah chapter 6, Egypt was ruled by the 25th dynasty. These are known as the Black Pharaohs. They were from Cush. They were from the kingdom of Cush. They had highly assimilated into Egyptian culture. They worshipped Egyptian gods, especially the god Amun, and they built several small pyramids along the Nile. Now, pyramids were built in the old kingdom of Egypt No pyramids had been built for many, many centuries. And this is the first pyramids that are built in many centuries, and the only ones that are built this far south. But they adopted some of the Egyptian symbolism and built their own pyramids in the land of Nubia or Cush. Before the 25th dynasty, Egypt had been divided and had become a disorganized mess. And it was known as the Third Intermediate Period. Pa, who was a Cushite, became the founder of the 25th dynasty, and he stepped into that power vacuum. And over the course of decades, he gained control over first Upper and then Lower Egypt. You can see a portrayal of this in the documentary called Remember the Time with Michael Jackson and Eddie Murphy and Iman. And here you can see them performing a historically accurate dance routine from the 25th dynasty. This is all true. This is all exactly what happened. Under the rule here of Paye, Egypt would back the Philistines in rebelling against Assyria. He would also try to gain control of more territory, but was ultimately unsuccessful. The 25th dynasty would have 7 pharaohs. Now, they are mentioned in the book of 2 Kings. 2 Kings 19:9 says, Tirhakah, king of Cush, came to the aid of Hezekiah against Sennacherib, king of Assyria, when his forces laid siege to Jerusalem in 701 BCE. Without this aid from this king of Cush, it's hard to imagine that the kingdom of Judah would have survived the assault of Assyria. And so what exactly part that played in it and what exactly part the miracle that happens outside of Jerusalem played in it is hard to understand, but definitely the assistance from the king of Cush, who was also the pharaoh of Egypt at the time, played an important part in repelling the Assyrians and saving Jerusalem. But there is a bit of a problem with this. The king or the pharaoh that we're talking about here is Pharaoh Tirhakah. He would not become pharaoh until 11 more years. In the year 690 BCE is when he ascends to the throne as pharaoh, and he is the 6th pharaoh in this line. But this may have been that at the time of Isaiah and the invasion that he was a military commander, and that when they were writing the story down, they sort of retroactively gave the title of king to him because he would later become king, not so much that he was king at this time. We see that happen a few times in various histories, including the Bible. Tirhakah was considered the greatest pharaoh of this entire dynasty. He extended his kingdom to the greatest extent before it all came crashing down under the next pharaoh, which ended the 25th dynasty. And so this was a powerful and magnificent pharaoh, and really the greatest Cushite leader that we have any history of. Starting in around the 660s BCE, which is, again, after the life of Isaiah by a couple decades probably, Assyria would then invade Egypt. It would end the Cush rule, and they would set back up native Egyptians as sort of puppet kings in their place. And Cush would retreat back to its homeland in Nubia, and it would form a new political capital there, Meroe. The kingdom of Cush would actually continue onward for at least another 1,000 years, and it would finally dissolve in the 4th century Common Era. I have a number of papers, if you're interested in learning more about them and their history, that I'll link to in the comments. They're fascinating people and are often not adequately studied and have important role in history. And throughout this chapter, we have only 7 verses here in this prophecy about them, but they're fascinating verses and they're full of interesting questions that we don't necessarily have good answers to. So I have a lot to say about these things. But as we come here to verse 1, we start out with, land of whirring wings that is beyond the rivers of Cush. The land of whirring wings, with Nubia, it is, as we said, along the upper reaches of the Nile. It's in equatorial Africa. It is known for its abundance of insects. And Herodotus tells us about this. The idea that this is the land of whirring wings is probably a reference to this vast number of insects that dwell there. Although there are some questions around this term, whirring wings or buzzing wings, it is possible that this also refers to the types of boats that they used, that those might have been referred to as winged craft that move as swiftly as the insects fly through the air, sort of thing. That it may be some sort of a reference to those kind of things. And of course, the boats that they use are mentioned in our next verse. But the word here, whirring, itself is a very interesting one. It is silsal, which is another one of those great words that Isaiah loves to use, where we have this repeating syllable. And it occurs only here, probably. There's a verse in Deuteronomy, but it looks like it's from a different root. So we're not really quite sure what it is. It's a bit disputed. There is an Aramaic word that refers to boats, and that's part of where we get the idea that this might be a land of winged boats or fast ships. But the reference seems most likely to be to the insects. So we go to verse 2 here, and it says, "The cinder of ambassadors by the sea, in a vessel of papyrus on the face of the waters." And this is accurate. Water travel was an important part of Egyptian and Nubian culture. The Nile, of course, being the main highway that all of their nation was lined up along. And so moving up and down the Nile was incredibly important. And yes, papyrus was used for everything, including making boats and paper and clothing and any number of other things. The word here that is translated as papyrus is gome, and it's not a very common word. One of the places where it is used is when it is describing the vessel that Moses was placed into as a child. He was placed into a basket made of gome and put on the Nile. So quite similar here to the idea of a boat that's going on the Nile. It's an incredibly important plant throughout Egypt. We're going to see this word used again over in chapter 35 of Isaiah. But we have these papyrus boats that are going along the face of the waters. And then we have this, "Go, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared near and far, a mighty nation and conquering, whose land the rivers wash away." So it's a little unclear here. Who are these messengers that are going along the Nile, and who sent them? One interpretation is that the messengers are the Nubians, who are going somewhere, but it's not clear where they would be going. The more likely interpretation here is that it is people being sent to them. So these are ambassadors or messengers that are being sent to them. And that is borne out here by the to a nation, to a people, not from. So these messengers are heading into Nubia, bearing some sort of a message to them, and we're urging them to go quickly. Now, we don't know of anything in history that this actually lined up. But again, as we've said a few times here in these oracles about the nations, these may not be intended to be historical. We may be speaking in symbols throughout this entire process, because we really can't seem to see a lot of historical connection with what's described here. So we call them a tall and smooth people. Well, the Hebrew word here that's translated as tall is literally pulled out or elongated. It's not the usual word for tall. And the term here that we're translating as smooth or smooth skinned comes from a verbal stem that means either polished or plucked. And this probably is referring to these tall Africans who have very little body hair. And they don't seem to mention the color of their skin. They are more fascinated by their height and the fact that they are not as hairy as the rest of the people. One of the interesting things is this word here for tall might actually be an Ethiopic or Cushite loanword, according to the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. And it might actually refer not to being tall, but to drawing a bow. And there could be a good argument this is commenting on their ability to do archery rather than just their physical height. Although Herodotus also mentions that they were the tallest and most handsome of men. You'll see that in his histories 3.20 and 3.114. So they were known for being tall, but it's possible this is also talking about their ability with the bow, which goes with the idea that they were a conquering nation that was quite feared. But both the word for tall, which is mamusha, and the word for smooth, which is marat, are unusual words. And we're not completely sure what we're saying about these people by using those words, but this is our best guess. And they are feared far and wide, or from near to far. The reputation of these people was well known throughout the entire known world. We say that they are a mighty nation. This also is a bit of a guess. The Hebrew says they are a Hakon nation, another interesting repeated syllable word that in our traditional text shows up as two words, but in the Dead Sea Scrolls pushes it together into a single word. And we're not sure which is correct. The word ka or kav means line, like a measurement line, a line meant to determine if something is level or straight. That doesn't make a lot of sense. A line nation. So we don't think that's what this word means. There is some thought that it is connected to Isaiah 28:10, where we have the famous statement from Isaiah about line upon line. And it's questioning what Isaiah meant in that verse, that perhaps there in that verse, he was also talking about speaking in gibberish, or that this could be making fun of the way a foreign country speaks, that they were a Kakon nation imitating the sounds as they saw it of their nation. This would not be a precedent. Our own word barbarian, or the proper name Barbara, comes from the same type of thing. They were the barbar people, the people who that was imitating their speech. They were the barbar people that go to the name Barbara or barbarian, meaning exotic or foreign. And this is how they're viewed. And so this was a Kakon nation, might be that same type of thing, the people that speak in a language that cannot be understood. But it's also possible that this word here has a different meaning. The King James translators really didn't know what to do with it, and so they translated it as a people meted out, going to the idea of line being used for measuring. That's almost certainly wrong. But there are a couple of other possible roots that this comes from, and one of them might mean mighty or strong. The word kaka has been proposed to have an Arabic can mean strength. That's part of how we get the idea that that might be one of its meanings. And based on the context, that seems like that might fit better. We are talking about them as an exotic people. So are we talking about them being tall and smooth skinned, or are we talking about them being great archers and powerful and mighty? It's hard to say. All of these things could apply to these people. Now, the word here, Ankri, which comes right after it, the Hebrew word means something more like treading down. And this word is also a rare word. It's used only 3 times, all of them in Isaiah, and twice in this chapter. So again, we don't really know a lot about what this means. And then we ended up with this line here, whose land the rivers wash away. Well, the word here, wash away, is also an unusual word that we're not sure exactly what it means. The word is baza, and it occurs only in this oracle twice, here and then later down in verse 7. Some suggestions is that it means to divide based on a possible Aramaic or Arabic cognate to it, but there's another Arabic word that might be a cognate to it that means to wash away. And that seems like that could be a possibility here, that we could be referring to the annual flooding of the Nile, which was an important thing to these people. So describing them as the people where the rivers wash away their land could be referring to them as the people who live in this land that regularly floods every year. It could also mean that it was a place where the rivers divide the land, because yes, the Nile does divide it to one side of the land on each shore. Either one could work. It's possible, I suppose, that Isaiah was seeing into the future and realizing that these people would eventually have their land flooded, I guess. I mean, we don't really know what he was intending by this, but he's describing these people of Cush, and he's telling us about them, that they are a feared people, a powerful people. It is possible he is referring to them as being tall and beautiful. It is possible that he is talking to us about them being fierce warriors. They are a river-living people, that the river is their home and they are deeply tied to it. That is what we get out of this sense so far. And messengers are being sent to them. So what are these messengers supposed to be sending as a message? And we never really find out who sent them. But these messengers are going there, and they're to go there quickly to these people, to hurry up and get there. And so in verse 3, this is presumably the message of the messengers that they bring to them. All you inhabitants of the world, you who dwell on the earth, when an ensign is raised on the mountains, look. When a ram's horn is blown, hear. Powerful, recurring imagery in Isaiah, the idea of an ensign or a flag being raised up in the mountains. Sometimes it is a symbol of a coming destruction, but sometimes it is a symbol of the restoration of Zion and the gathering of Israel. And in this one particularly, based on how this chapter proceeds, it seems to be about the gathering and restoration of Zion. So it is saying to these Nubians, when you see the ensign raised up on the hill probably being a reference to Zion itself, look at it. When you hear the ram's horn being blown, a trumpet signal, often used to gather armies or to gather for a holy assembly, any of those can be done with a ram's horn. When you hear that being blown, listen to it. That is the message of these messengers to the people of Cush. And then we have here in verse 4, for thus the Lord saith to me. We assume this is, the me here is Isaiah, and this is a message that the Lord has given to Isaiah. Perhaps this is also part of what the messengers are to deliver to the people of Cush. And the message is, I am silent and look from my place. Well, this word silence, interesting. The Hebrew word is shekek. The translation is based partially on a marginal note from the Masoretic scribes, since the word that's in our traditional text looks like a misspelling. I'm a little skeptical that we have the right word here. It doesn't seem to work with the rest of the verse here that he is silent, but something is happening here, that the Lord is speaking and he is something, and he's looking from his place. Now, the word for place is also a problem. This word is one that we see a few times. It seems to refer specifically to a place of God, perhaps to his throne or his temple. Although it's not the word that specifically means throne or temple, when it is used, it seems to be referencing that. We had this used in Isaiah back in Isaiah chapter 4, verse 5, where it was associated with the pillar of fire and cloud over Zion. And I think that's the imagery we're going for with this, that he's looking out from his place, his throne, his temple, his spot on Mount Zion. And I think that goes with the next two lines that we have here. Like shimmering heat in sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. Well, these lines, as you can guess, I'm going to say, they're also a little bit uncertain. This word for shimmering, the word is saf. It's also a name of a month in the Canaanite calendar. So it might mean something like the August heat in the sunshine state. Ask anybody from Arizona what that means. So yes, this may be referring to the heat of a specific month, or it could be referring to the shimmering effect that happens on hot surfaces in sunshine where the air is all wavy and all of that imagery of a shimmering air, a distorting air goes well with the idea of a cloud of dew, which is in the next part of the line here. The term heat of harvest, several manuscripts actually have day of harvest instead of heat of harvest here. And heat occurring in both lines seems like it could also possibly be a scribal error, and that this should say, like a cloud of dew in the day of harvest rather than in the heat of harvest. That may be a scribal error that has crept in. But this idea of shimmering air and a cloud of dew both seem to be a representation of this divine presence. And it's unusual language, but it seems to tie into that cloud imagery of the pillar of cloud over the divine presence in Zion. But here we are tying it into an agricultural context where we talk about a cloud of dew in the day of harvest. Now we're going to tie it to this agricultural imagery, which is what's going to predominate through verse 5. In verse 5, we have, for before the harvest, as the flower is completed, and the unripe grape ripens, he shall have a blossom. And he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks, and the spreading branches he lops off and clears away. There are a lot of interesting and unusual words behind this translation as well. It's possible that this is just describing the normal pruning process in grapes where unproductive branches are removed, which allows the grapes to grow larger for harvesting, or it might not be that. We have several technical terms here that were probably very clear to people in Isaiah's day as to exactly what they meant, but we're just not fully certain about. As the flower is completed, that part is pretty clear. The word for flower, perak, is a very common word. But then we have the word boser, which is translated here as an unripe grape. This word is used only 4 times in the Hebrew Bible, but it's enough that its meaning is pretty solid. This is a grape that has not yet ripened. And then we have the verb right after it, to ripen. This is the verb gomel. It's used in a fair number of contexts. It might mean to thicken or plumpen up. It might mean to sweeten. It is also used for weaning children, that they ripen, wean off. So it's a word that has a lot of diversity to it. But then we have this word that I translated as blossom. This word is used only 3 times and seems to be referring to some state before a completely ripe grape. The word is nitzah. The butler's dream in Genesis 40, verse 10, uses this word. And it seems to be, in his dream, it goes from a flower, same word that we have here for flower, to a nitzah, then to a ripe grape. And it seems like he's watching this happen in almost like a time-lapse manner, that it's very rapidly growing and developing into this ripe grapes as he gives them to Pharaoh and all stuff in the dream. So this seems to be part of this process, and it is somewhere before the ripe grape process. So this is another word, probably very specific word for a specific stage in the grape growth. We have that this unripe grape is going to ripen, and then it's going to turn into a nitzah, and then is going to cut off the shoots with pruning hooks. Well, the word for shoots here is another fun Hebrew word. It is the word zalzal. And again, Isaiah loves these words with the repeating syllable. It is only used here. The Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament defines it as shoot of the vine without fruit buds. So this would be an unproductive part of the vine that's being cut off. And if we're talking about normal agricultural process, this would make sense. You take your pruning hook and you cut off the parts of the grapevine that do not produce fruit, so the rest can grow larger. But that same lexicon also points out that 2 other scholars have come to the exact opposite conclusion. These were actually fruit-bearing vines. This is saying that you're taking your pruning hooks and you're cutting off these unripe fruit before they finish ripening. And I think that's the stronger argument for what we're describing here. As I've read through this many times now, I think that's the one I'm convinced is happening here. We're not talking about a normal agricultural pruning process, but we're talking about somebody coming in with pruning hooks and actually cutting off the vines, have the precious grapes that have not finished ripening on them. I will point out that this word zalzal is similar sounding to the word for buzzing wings, and that, knowing Isaiah, is probably intentional. He's probably having some fun here with linking words together, as he often does. The word for pruning hooks. The only other place that this word is used is in the famous statement in Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4, where you will beat your spears into pruning hooks, and the places in Micah and Yoel where it quotes Isaiah saying that same thing. That's the only other time that we use this word pruning hooks. So this is part of how we know what that word means. It's obviously a device which is used to cut grapevines. And what is the connection between beating spears into pruning hooks and this passage? I don't know. That could be a link, though. We're referring to this idea of eventual peace, weapons of war coming into agricultural instruments, but it's uncertain. We're going to cut off the shoots with pruning hooks, and then the spreading branches he lops off and clears away. Parallel, obviously, to the previous one. But this word here for the branches is natisha, and Jeremiah uses this same word over in Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 10, describing removing the natisha from the walls of Jerusalem as a way of trimming back, but not ending the kingdom of Judah. And so this gives us some insight here as to what we're talking about with this, that apparently the message here, or the vision that Isaiah had, is that part of Cush will be trimmed back, but they will not be ended. And that goes with the idea here of verse 6, that it says, and they shall be abandoned together to the birds of prey of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth. It only makes sense that these things being abandoned to birds of prey and beasts would be that if they're the grapes, birds of prey and beasts are probably not going to want to just snack on vines that have no fruit on them. That's part of why I think we have the stronger argument here that these are the productive vines that are being cut off and then left behind for the birds of prey and the beasts to come in and consume. And we have a nice little chiasm here. And will summer on them the birds of prey, and the beasts of the earth on them will winter. This is a fun one too. Summer and winter used as verbs only occurs here. That's the only time in all the Hebrew Bible that these are used as verbs. That they will summer on them and that they will winter on them. But what is it that they're consuming? It would have to be the grapes. I can't think that these discarded, unproductive vines would be appealing to birds or beasts. It seems like this would have to be the productive vines, that they're going to come in and they're going to be left on the ground, and these wild animals are going to come in and consume them. And this might be parallel to our last chapter where we talked about the olive trees and the gleanings that were left on the olive trees were all that was left. And so the idea here that there will be a consumption and there will be a small amount left could be what we're talking about. Now, this verse is the only verse in this prophecy that has anything negative or destructive towards Cush. This is all we've got, is they will be trimmed back. Although it is common to interpret all of these prophecies in this section as prophecies of doom, I think on a close reading, none of them really hold up to, especially as we continue on to verse 7. But before we do that, I want to note that Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 9 and 10 seem to be related to this verse here, as they use some of this same vocabulary, including the same rare word for birds of prey. And speaking of a vineyard in regard to them, it says, is my heritage to me like a hyena's lair? Are the birds of prey against her all around? Go assemble all the wild beasts, bring them to devour. Many shepherds have destroyed my vineyard. They have trampled down my portion. They have made my pleasant portion a desolate wilderness. So again, we've got Jeremiah giving insight into Isaiah here. Both of these passages have very uncommon vocabulary words that they share. In Jeremiah, the vineyard seems to be Judah, and the destruction is from the neglect of the shepherds. And again, it's important to note that Cush was not destroyed and would not be destroyed for about 1,000 years, though they are beaten back out of Egypt. And so this may be a reuse of the same kind of symbolism that Jeremiah may have seen this as a connection to what he was about to describe happening to Judah, that these people of Cush were to lose their position of power and be reduced back, but that there was still a future for them. Which brings us to verse 7. At that time, tribute will be brought to the Lord of hosts from a people tall and smooth, from a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers wash away, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, Mount Zion. And so we ended here with this powerful statement that the messengers have come to tell them to look for when they see the ensign raised on the hill, to listen for when they hear the trumpet blow, that the vines are going to be trimmed back, but they are to bring a tribute to Zion, to Mount Zion, to the Lord of hosts from this mighty people. And so we're told here that this people have a glorious future. they will become welcome into Zion, bearing gifts to the Lord to worship at the temple. And we see in the Second Temple period that there were people in the Cush community that were doing just that, were going to Jerusalem to worship at the temple. And so there seems to be this definite connection. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't say that there are several groups in this area that have traditions around how their connection with either Judaism or in some cases Christianity goes way back into biblical times. It is very hard to evaluate those claims because there's very little history in this area. Our history is extremely sparse for this people. But statements like this do seem to indicate that there may have been places and pockets among them where indeed there was conversion to the faith of the God of Israel that may have persisted for quite some time into the future, even into modern times. So it's a fascinating thing, and there's far more questions than there are answers. And there's always the overarching question of what was Isaiah intending with this? Is he talking about a real historical event where this is going to happen? Is he talking about more a symbolic thing of just in general other nations being invited in to worship at Zion, even from the farthest reaches? It's hard to say. But that was Isaiah chapter 18. I hope you enjoyed it. And please give us a like and a subscribe. Tell your friends about the channel. Tell them they should watch it. And I'll see you in the next one.